Also, by the way, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. We
Yeah.
definitely see you as a light, a guiding light in a lot of stuff. And I just remember all of the valuable conversations you and I had when you came out for IGC. And so I was
Yeah.
like, I wonder if he'd be willing to come talk to kind of all of us, if you will.
Oh man, this is gonna be good.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Gloving Table Talks. I'm Peter, and of course, we have our host, Peter Prime, and our very wonderful guest that we have today, someone not within the gloving community, but also well beloved within the flow arts community in general. We have a Drex Factor. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So for our audience members, if you don't know, sorry Josh, I didn't mean to cut you
Yeah.
off.
So
No, do your thing. Do your thing.
Oh no, I was just gonna say we had a little lead up here before we started this off, and Sari asked me a very very insightful question, and I would love to jump back to that. Do you want to restate it here for the purposes of recording?
Let's do that. Let's do exactly that.
Yeah, let's restate this. So what I was asking earlier, and I find kind of the overall
I'm not getting
topic-
audio from her or either of you guys.
I'm
you hear
able
me?
to hear her.
One minute, 37 seconds later.
My goodness, this is the first time I actually had some technical difficulties.
Yeah, Discord is
Hey!
Yay!
Okay, very good.
Everybody now.
We got it. All
Okay.
right.
Hallelujah.
All right,
Test,
so
test, test.
back to where we were. We're going to restate our question.
All right.
Yeah.
So
I get to have some comical fun cutting that together.
yeah, no kidding.
Fun.
In case you couldn't tell,
Sounds-
this is really casual, and Peter will do a lot of cutting and editing and whatnot, so we will be totally fine. So I guess my general question to you, and kind of the topic of this entire discussion, is we're in a unique circumstance where we have just lost our biggest spotlight in the form of amazing and gloving being shown to other people as, you know, what gloving actually is. And I'm just curious as to, have you seen this happen in any other flow arts communities, or are we just kind of in a unique circumstance here?
So I'm going to give you a complicated answer to that question. I will say from the start that so every circumstance is going to be unique in its own regards, and y'all are in a unique circumstance just by dint of the fact that there's a unique culture to gloving, and Amazing Lights was uniquely positioned within that community, and yes, that is going to create a bit of a vacuum, and there's no other direct comparison that I can draw to that. Said, I can think of some parallel examples that have some things in common. One of the biggest, honestly, being when Home of Poi lost its position as the center of the Poi and fire spinning world. Which, granted, that happened before we really entered into the social media era, and you could definitely argue that social media was one of the factors by which Home of Poi lost that position. But there were other compounding factors too, and it's wild because this even goes back to like really before I was spinning Poi regularly, and Home of Poi was just literally the hub around which the entire Poi spinning community revolved. You know, that was where you went to find tutorials online back before YouTube was a thing. That was where you would go to buy equipment. Every year they would have a contest that they called Circles of Light, where you would submit a video of yourself spinning Poi, and it would be released in a compilation DVD every year. So that was also where you went in order to be seen. So as things started to shift, it definitely had, and also too, they had online message boards that to this day so much of Poi's history is locked inside of those boards, and you can only get to them now via like using the Wayback Machine or something like that, some of the archived web pages. So that happened to the Poi world too, but we had also the benefit of the fact that part of why it went away was because Home of Poi had to compete with YouTube. And it had to compete with the fact that all of a sudden people were no longer going directly to the Home of Poi website in order to get access to all these resources. And, you know, arguably they could have made the same call that Amazing Lights did and have a major presence on YouTube. They made a bad choice at a really specific point in history, and it cost them a big part of their audience. Now, how does that relate to what's going on in the gloving community right now? So I think there are some lessons to take away from that. Number one is that it's absolutely possible to rebuild a community even after a center hub of it has effectively lost that position. The trick there is that when you decentralize a community like that, it becomes more personality driven than necessarily being driven by a particular entity, a particular place that aggregates media. So there's an opportunity right now for a lot of individuals to kind of bring their own presence into this. And of course, social media is fantastic for launching individuals as brands. There's also an opportunity here if somebody wanted to do a thing that we've tried a few times in the Poi world and we've never really been able to pull off, which is having a secondary hub. There have been many times when people have tried to launch like an online magazine around Poi spinning. And generally speaking, the problem you run into is that it takes time and it takes a commitment to consistency in order to get there. My YouTube channel, I think I was doing it for 7 or 8 years before I even cracked like 30,000 people on that channel. I could easily see somebody launching either a gloving or a Poi spinning channel that fundamentally has like the same structure as like Crash Course, the educational YouTube channel, for instance, where you have a number of personalities that filter through there and perhaps offer commentary. And then you can either use that to seed audiences for their individual channels, or you can bring in big personalities from their own channels to help feed audiences into this centralized hub, right? It requires some planning to do that. It requires some resources, and it requires people who are good at logistics and good at aggregating these pieces together. It's not impossible, though. If I were going to look into a crystal ball and say, here's what's coming next for you all, I genuinely think that the most likely option is you're going to see a proliferation of individual gloving channels popping up that are centered around individual people's brands. And that's not a bad thing. It takes time. It takes a long time. Like I was saying a few minutes ago, I don't know if it's going to wind up in the final edit or not. You know, I was doing my YouTube channel for years before it became something that was remotely close to sustainable, or even something where I had a big enough audience that I could start to put my finger on the pulse and move the pulse of the community around me. And there were a lot of days when it looked like that was never going to happen. And, you know, I had to stick with it and be like, no, I'm not going to judge on what things look like on my channel today. I need to think about what is this going to look like 5 years from now? What is the plan for that place down the road? And how do we spend each day between now and then trying to get there?
You know, it's interesting that you brought up individual personalities, that kind of being the harbinger of the new wave, because in a sense that is kind of what Amazing did. I mean, on top of having all of the, you know, the funding and the competitions and all of those things, that is kind of what Amazing did with the sponsors, is that they were branding the sponsors as these personalities. And that was like a big gripe that I had, that as I saw EL start to shift away from it, there was a little bit of a shift in, I don't know, a lack of incentive to interact with it once that started to move away. So it's definitely interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah. I think that, you know, looking at that, it's like Peter and I, we've had conversations regarding this in the past, and I think fundamentally like kind of having a resurgence in kind of this personality driven kind of era for like whatever the next wave of gloving is. What it's essentially going to come down to is having something that is less essentially institutionally driven and something more that is kind of more grassroots and individually driven. You know, I think Kevin said a while ago that one of the things that he thinks was not a flaw, but maybe something that has hindered gloving's growth is that in a lot of ways, eMazing was there very early to kind of like cultivate this community, which is really nice in a way because it accelerated a lot of things for us, you know, but also because of that, we didn't have this era of grassroots growth where like the community was really the ones pushing things forward, where the community kind of earned our, I guess, essentially right to be able to do these big things. And it's kind of like now that mom and dad, now that our parents are just kind of gone, it's like, how do we fend for ourselves, right? And I think there are people like Kevin who are kind of like leading this kind of newer kind of independent personality driven era where we are now no longer looking towards our institutions to lead us. It is now up to us to decide how to go forward. The question really is how.
Yeah. Well, and something I want to flag there right quick, just because, you know, in the first year of the pandemic, we wound up having this conversation as a community between the hooping and poi communities that like, one of those things to watch out for when you wind up in a position where the community is being driven by these kind of individual personality based brands is that by definition, you're working with a very small sample set of people, and it's kind of a crapshoot as to who winds up kind of becoming the big personalities there and what are the values that they represent. Like, how often are you going to get somebody that you find out years down the road, like, has a skeleton in their closet that, you know, does not represent the values that you want to see represented in this community? And of course, you know, that is a risk too when it's more centrally driven. If there's a central institution that is kind of driving a community, because again, you know, there are values that they might espouse, and I'm sure that the subtext is clear to everybody who is on the call right now. Here, there might be particular values that institution might hold dear, that also don't feel like they're a great fit for the community. You know, it becomes one of those things that, you know, having to find checks and balances between all that stuff, especially when there's nobody necessarily really driving the bus, can be challenging. And it can be just as challenging when the person driving the bus may not necessarily be the person that you want behind the wheel at any given point.
Well, and I feel that the checks and balances system, first of all, there hasn't been one. It's been just kind of, you know, when Josh was talking earlier about how we kind of had that grassroots thrust upon us and we had that responsibility taken away from us from what EL was creating and whatnot, a lot of that attitude of we want to make sure that this is exactly what we want kind of was futile because we had so few bus drivers. So it became really hard to kind of vet, like, who's doing what. And we ended up finding out that, like, everyone has skeletons in the closet. All of the bus drivers had skeletons in the closet. So when we would find them, we would kind of be like, do we want to bite the hand that feeds us and then just kind of turn into a self-feeding little cycle? So I'm just seeing like what Josh was pointing out, that he's right. We didn't have that opportunity to kind of have that grassroots thing. It just started with EL and other companies, of course, but we're all in agreement that EL had the highest impact and had the greatest outreach and whatnot. So even that's a little tricky. You know, you'll have people in gloving, like, people will point out a skeleton in the closet and then you'll get a response of, oh, don't take it that seriously. And it's like, well,
yeah, it's
What?
It's one of those things where it's like I understand why some people have that mentality. Like if I'm to equate it to certain cultures like the Magic the Gathering community, you have majority of the people playing that game what my friends call like what's it called, like kitchen top gamers, right? Like they don't really interact with the Magic community on a deep level. They just really enjoy the game, so they buy a bunch of cards, they get their friends together every once in a while and they just play. And that's fine, right? Like we definitely want people to engage with their respective hobbies, the things that they love in whatever degree they want to. However, there is something to be said about there are always going to be people who want to engage with the stuff they want on a much deeper fundamental level, right? For me, like gloving's an important part of who I am, right? And I think with everyone here, all the things, like the reason we're all here right now is because we all love our respective hobbies, right? So it's like, I feel like at the end of the day, like it's one of the reasons why we're having our specific conversation at all, because right now we're like, sure, there are some people who are going to treat this casually, but also
we need them. We need
Yeah,
the people who are treated casually.
and even then, like what people are doing here is also going to affect them whether they realize it or not.
Sure. I had this conversation just a few weeks ago with a company that makes LED poi, and the gentleman who runs it was talking about like the way he visualizes this in his head is it's like a funnel where like people have to encounter this art somewhere and first have a casual relationship with it, and it's maybe 1 in 10 people then that are going to take that next step where they would be what I refer to as flow curious. That is, people who like have an availability in their head of like, oh, maybe this is something that I want to get engaged in, and they might take that further step down to like get a prop or to take a lesson or what have you, look up a tutorial, and they might casually engage with it. And then the next line down, you have the people who like start to become more devoted to it and it becomes a part of their regular routine. And you work your way down to those who just like have devoted themselves heart, body, mind, and soul to it. And the people at the bottom of that funnel desperately need everybody who's above them in the funnel, because it is all those people above them in the funnel that makes the bottom of the funnel even possible to begin with.
Right.
Yep.
So we need to work on restructuring the funnel. We had the funnel structured for us by EL, so we need to actually work on restructuring what that even looks like, which is so up in the air. And it's funny that you talk about, like the main centralized hub and how, all of the history is in there. And that's what we have with the Glover's Lounge. And the Glover's Lounge is our greatest strength and biggest weakness because it's such an echo chamber. It's a private group for reasons. We have reasons why it's like that. Like we can't just make it public. But we have the private group and then we have worldwide Glovers and whatnot. But there's a sensation of feeling stuck inside of GL and feeling stuck on Facebook where, why would I go out onto YouTube and have my algorithm suffer when I can just go into Glover's Lounge and post it and get my 100 likes and call it a day, So we're really stuck with that where we kind of have the reverse where GL is kind of all we have, and it's a bit of a hindrance. I mean, we do have the Worldwide Glovers Discord, but again, it's more private. It's more another one of those hubs. So we've lost the company presence within that hub, but we still have the hub. And everybody is just kind of like holding on to it for dear life because the Rave Act punched the crap out of gloving. It really did not. I'm sure you can understand in different ways that the Rave Act really punched. And the Rave Act gave everybody a bit of spite where we're like, no, we're going to go build this community for ourselves since you won't let them in that space. And then COVID hit. And it's almost like COVID put us back to where we were when the Rave Act was just passing. And we don't have EL to rescue us this time.
Well, and at the risk of throwing something that may be a controversial idea out there, I don't think that you need EL to rescue y'all. I think that this is a thing that can just as easily be looked at as an opportunity more than anything else, because you already have a very, very dedicated community to this art, and now you have a choice as to where it gets to go next. What would you like for it to look like in 5 years, as opposed to like, is there somebody who's gonna come in and kind of take the wheel for all of the various baggage that comes with that, you know?
Right.
So there's actually a piece of that I want to pull out right quick, because this is actually something that like I keep trying to get people to understand in the poi world, and people just refuse to believe me, no matter like how I present this, which is that like online groups are kind of overrated in a lot of respects. Not just because they can lead to a lot of toxic behaviors, which yes, that can absolutely happen, but also because they tend out to be really, really not great places for people to build audiences, because by definition, anything that winds up in one of those online groups, people are in that online group because of the shared interest. They may not be necessarily directly interested in what you're doing, and it may be that at some point they find your content and they get more invested in that. But you've got the algorithm sitting between you and your possible audience. You have the fact that they didn't come to that group for your content specifically, sitting between you and that possible audience. People do it because it gives them a very, very short route to feeling good. You know, they post to a group, they get like 20, 30 likes, and that makes them feel good right now. And they don't think about, well, what about 5 years from now, right? Because it sucks starting off a channel on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram right now, because nobody's going to see anything that you make for a while. But if you keep with that, like there was definitely a like holy crap moment for me. I think it was last year, where you know the largest poi group on Facebook, which I think is also the largest flow arts group on Facebook at this point, is Poi Chat, which is 30,000 plus people at this point. And recognizing that I didn't have a single social media channel that had fewer followers than that. No matter where I posted a video to, I always had an audience bigger than 30,000 to post to, on Instagram and on YouTube. So these places are useful to find like-minded individuals, but in terms of creating a community and an audience around what you produce, you're so much better off doing the long game and building piece by piece through your own channel. You know, there's a love-hate relationship with those groups, of course, because they are places where you can go to get your finger on the pulse of the community and find out, what are people talking about, what are people curious about, what do people need right now. But that should always be stuff that comes back and nourishes yourself. It should always be stuff that comes back and nourishes your own presence, because, you know, when push comes to shove, we could lose any platform at any time for any reason. And so you have to make sure that you're working in such a way that, you know, you have your place where people come to specifically to interact with you.
So with that, are people okay if I ask a follow-up question with that? Are people cool with that?
Go for it.
Yeah, so Drex, the funny thing is, I've actually known you live in DC for a while, because I'm actually up in Maryland.
Wait, well, so hang on, what part of Maryland?
I'm in, 20 minutes west.
Yeah. No, so technically speaking, I'm over the line. I'm in Maryland.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I
wanted to vote in Congress again, okay?
But
Nobody who doesn't know much about DC is going to get that joke.
But yeah, like, so one thing, I mean, I figured that we just never interacted because we just probably run in different circles, right? And it's like, one thing that I've found particularly difficult is that with the gloving community, we kind of basically do the tri-state, right? We do Maryland, DC, and Virginia, right? I'm not sure if Poi's like that as well. But one thing that I found difficulty in growing a community here is that, like, because it is 3 states and like the people who are gloving within these 3 states are kind of like, you know, spread apart even within the same state. So it's like whenever we can get together, it is like a big deal, right? But it's kind of like an analog problem of what you were describing with the digital space, which is that we are specifically looking for people who are already interested in this.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you had any tips on how to cultivate a new community based not only on people who are already in it, but who might potentially want to be in it.
Sure. So clearly with any flow art, discovery is the biggest problem. How do you get people to see this for the first time? And I will say straight off the bat, I don't have an answer to that question. I have been working it through in my head for a decade now, and I will admit when I don't know the answer to a question, and I don't know the answer to this question just yet.
At least we're not the only ones. That's
No.
It's a comforting notion to know that we're not the only ones.
It's also a great chance to brainstorm, so.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's several pieces to this. So I can give you the route by which any individual can create community, and I can give you some notes as to how individuals can collaborate to create that kind of community. So this is the outline of how you build a business out of any sort of content channel. You answer people's questions. Basically, you create content around common questions that people have. You know, what's the best set of gloves to start with? What are the first tricks that I should start with? How do I find other glovers? Things like that. You know, you basically look specifically for the things that everybody is asking when they first start off into this world. You make sure that you have an answer to that question and you post it. And as you're doing this, you also give them a big heaping spoonful of your personality. Because part of the point of this is that they're not just coming for an answer, they're coming for your answer. They want to get to know you. They want to make contact with people in these communities. We're human beings. We love making new friends. We love creating our own tribes, right? Once you have created a community around the stuff that you're producing, then you can do the things that make it sustainable. Then you can do the things like, you know, I'm going to create a live meetup, or I'm going to start a Patreon or something like that. But in order to get there, you have to first create content that is of value to people, and then you have to create the in-group identifiers for it, whether it be vocabulary, whether it be familiar sayings. You know, the way that you started this off with the Peter Prime stuff and everything, that's a great example of that, you know? That's a meme that you all share, that you all can commonly identify with, right? Now, if you're gonna, this is the recipe for making this happen for an individual. I think y'all are looking for more than that, though. I think y'all are looking for that to happen as a community. And this is where you need collaborations to happen. When do people work together on this stuff? Why do they work together? Who are people that might have audiences that might overlap and like each other? Can you bring somebody on that people in your audience are likely to find appealing and want to check out more of their content? Guess what? You've just now shared an audience together, and there are shared values. There's a shared community there. You can do this on a scaled level, of course, where you bring together a lot of people to do these sorts of things. And again, it's really important when you do those collaborations that you give everybody an opportunity to showcase their unique personality, because that's part of why people are going to bond with them, right? Now, to talk more specifically about the example that you have cited, which I think we live in a really unique part of the country. I won't lie, I've lived in a lot of parts of this country, and the DMV is what we call it locally, even though it totally throws people that are not from this region. Because like, why would you want to go to the DMV? It's like, it's It is one of those local terms, all right? No, so there's so many challenges there because not only are we dealing with like trying to bring together people from so many different places, and of course, legendarily, you cannot get people from DC to go out into Northern Virginia. There's like, I don't want to take the train out there, but they're happy to ask people from Northern Virginia to take the train up into DC. And also, let's be real here, there's a lot of sensitivities around stuff in the nation's capital. One of the biggest challenges that we've had growing community here in DC is, guess what? In the same city where the Capitol building is, they're a little sensitive about flammable liquids. So fire spinning is kind of difficult around here.
Right.
And that also becomes a problem when you're talking about creating events that are driven towards creating community in underground scenes like this, because since DC is such a small area and it is a very, very high earning area, you don't find a lot of underground parties because there just aren't places in town where there are venues suitable for that sort of thing. Any place where you can stick a building, that building's going to be worth a ass ton of money. So, ironically enough, you're in a better part of Maryland to be doing this than I am, because in the DC area, we have that challenge. But in and around the Baltimore area, I granted, I haven't really been up to Baltimore since before the pandemic, but like the Baltimore art scene is like so much more cohesive in many respects than it is down here in DC, and a part of that is that it like you can have those underground parties out there, and it is a lot easier to pull off logistically than it is down here in DC. I don't know if there's any takeaways from that for other people watching, but I since it was so specific and DC is very much in my blood now, I wanted to go down that road a little bit.
Oh, but you bring up that people like having heroes.
Sure.
They like having heroes and inspirations, and so I see a lot of, within the past few years within gloving, a lot of those heroes not filling that role quite as much. I don't know, Peter or Josh, if you could kind of put your finger on where and when that started to happen. I think it was the OSM debacle, but that kind of started to happen, that some of the people like me, like Kevin, like we kind of started to get dethroned along the way. I don't know if it's just us becoming jaded or what.
Well, I'm not sure when it, at least this is my perspective, right? Because in a lot of ways, I haven't really been someone that's super engaged with like the broader community until like the last 2-3 years, something like that, right? So for the OSM thing, I've never really known like how it affected a lot of individuals kind of on like that kind of like social standing level. I always saw it a lot more from a kind of business political level. Like I always just saw it more as like these entities. That's just me personally, right? But when it comes to this idea of our heroes, if we want to use that word for this community, I always saw it just more as like a decline in activity, right? I always just saw it more as an issue of, one, the people who are like the staples of our community are getting older, right? And you know, sometimes that's not an issue, but it's one of those things where it's like no one, at least from my perspective, was making a lot of money gloving. At most, I think someone was using it to pay rent, and then they had some other sort of income to pay for everything else, right? So there already isn't a lot of money going towards paying the actual practitioners of our art. The other thing that I saw personally, and you know, we talk about Facebook and how like we basically created this kind of closed gate community, is that we have a harder time bringing in newer people. In fact, I think the last time I was on the podcast, we kind of touched upon it briefly, that like one of the issues that we're having is that we are getting new people here and there, but they're all kind of like in their mid to late 20s, right? And you know, by that point you have responsibilities, and oftentimes you're not engaging with this art that you could, as like a 16, 17-year-old, like when I started, like where you were just hungry to get good, right?
Yeah.
And personally, I think that's why I asked that question to you earlier, Drex, because that's the type of people we need coming in. We need like young blood, like, and I'm talking like we need basically kids who like are passionate and who are like us when we were young, willing to get to the top, right? Because at this
Absolutely.
point, I'm 28 and I'm just more like focused on making sure that whatever we have here can become better. And sometimes all of us in those positions right now, like you kind of have to sacrifice that glory to make sure this thing can become great, you know?
Huge elephant in the room that, you know, no Glover has ever really like been like hardcore paid, but there were people that were getting paid. And
Right.
the number one avenue for that was the EL sponsorship. And albeit it was a bit of a trap because it was, you know, code sales and those kinds of things, which is not fulfilling in any way. And, you know, we kind of got stuck in that for a little while. But nobody wants to talk about the value of monetization within this kind of field, but people need incentive, you know, it's kind of such a unique circumstance where instead of the framework being laid to how do you get there on your own without a company, we put in all that work, got monetized within Amazing, and Amazing went away, and now we're being faced with you have to do that work all over again without that company support, with no clear line of sight as to a route of monetization. Like, I'm sorry, I want to be paid to do this. Even just something. Like a little chunk of rent, you know, like if I were getting paid something, it would be significantly easier to get that going. And I know that kind of strips from the love of the art and that kind of thing, but it's just the reality of it. So if I can ask you a personal question, Drex, is your YouTube channel monetized? Are you receiving things? Okay.
Yeah. Actually, so I will give you actual numbers. I came up just shy of making 50 grand last year, and it looks like this year I might get closer to 60 grand.
Wow!
That was a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Well, also bear in mind, I do live in the DC area, so that doesn't go as far as you think it might, but
Sure.
yeah. And so key to that is I sometimes feel like an odd duck out in the flow arts world because to me, like I have been an entrepreneur my entire life. I started my first business in kindergarten. There has never been a time when that didn't seem normal to me. And Poise and flow arts is now my third creative career. Each and every one of them I turned into a job at one point. The way that works for me is, you know, a big part of it is Patreon income. If you create free content that other people benefit from, give them the opportunity to pay you for it. You would be shocked how willing people are to give you money to just make sure that a thing that they like keeps on happening. All that said, don't do it too early, or it feels a little bit like you're making demands instead of you're giving away something. Number two, I offer several products because primarily I'm an educator. People can I teach live stream courses via Crowdcast every Tuesday night. Great thing about that is it scales really well, so that class can work for 2 people, it can work for 20 people, it can work for 200 people. The amount of time and energy and effort that I'm spending in it works just as well in either case, and the challenge then becomes how many people can I get to sign up for it. More recently, I've also been offering private classes, which was something I held off on doing for a long time simply because it doesn't scale. Like, I can only invest that hour of my day in one person. There's only one person that can benefit from it. And Just the way my mind works, that it hurts me deep inside knowing that. But at the same time, it's so lucrative to do it that I think that's got to be part of the plan from here on out. I do monetize my YouTube channel. Generally speaking, I make about like $500 a month or so off of ads that run on my YouTube videos. And also now I'm getting ad income through Instagram, thanks to Reels and doing Reels bonuses. And I also get affiliate earnings through the companies that I have those deals with. Most companies, I get at least a 5% commission on any sale that I refer to them. Sometimes with one company, I have just a flat rate of it's $10 regardless of what the product is. Sometimes it works out in my favor, sometimes it doesn't, but they wanted it to be a flat rate, so a flat rate it was. The highest I think I get is 8% affiliate off of one of the companies that I'm working with. I also sell courses, so if people want a structured learning environment that works on their schedule, they can go to my learning site, learn.drexfactor.com, and they can sign up for my beginner course, they can sign up for my intermediate course. I've got several advanced courses on there as well. And actually, so this is a fun, like, how to build a business thing to pass on. So the live stream classes that I'm teaching right now, this is actually me trying out material for an entirely new course. So basically, people are signing up to pay me to learn this stuff, and in the meantime, I'm getting feedback from them on what's working and what's not, and how I should structure the course that I can then use to produce the full course later on this year. So I get paid for doing the test stuff, and I get paid for the final product too. It works out fantastically. And I'm trying to think if there's, I think that's all my income streams, but as you can see, I have a lot of different ways that I bring money in, and that's very, very much by design. I'm really conscious of the fact that any given platform could go away, and Patreon specifically made up more than 50% of my income for a very long time, and it's been a goal of mine for years now to get it under 50%, because if for whatever reason I get banned from Patreon, I want to be able to still pay rent, which I can do now. Hallelujah.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, so it is possible.
Absolutely.
It seems like what I'm, just from my reactions to this, is just, it seems a lot more possible than we're making it out to be.
Yes, and.
Yes, and, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, let's also be realistic about this, in that, like, for years I was doing this living well below the poverty line, and I had to have a lot of patience and a lot of faith that I was making a long-term bet that was going to pan out. 2 years ago, I swore that I had gotten as far as I could making income off my YouTube channel, and I was going to need to pivot into another business. And here we are 2 years later, and like, not only had I not found the ceiling, but like I've opened up other channels since then that have brought me further than I was expecting to go. So I don't know if I know where the ceiling is for it right now, but yeah, it takes a lot of patience. There were a lot of times when I wanted to give up. There actually was a specific point when I tried to give up, and I started interviewing for jobs. And it takes a lot of faith to get through those moments. A lot of faith and the support of your friends, and yeah, again, you have to think about what this is going to be in 5 years, not what it is right now. And it's difficult to do that. It's difficult even for me, and I've been doing it for a long time. There are still moments even to this day where I'm just like, how is this going to work? And I kind of have to catch myself and be like, you know what? Just show up to work every day. Just keep producing the content. Just keep doing the things. Just keep, like, it's almost like being a shark, where you have to keep yourself. Shark, wow. I did not intend to do that, but I'm going to take it now. You have to keep on swimming or you'll sink, you know, and you just have to keep pushing through those moments.
So in a focus, kind of like your focus, your kind of goal, mission statement with a lot of this stuff, have you found more success in focusing more on yourself as an entity, as an individual, or has focusing on the poi community at large, or is it both? Like, who are you thinking about when you're making these things? Are you thinking about how people are interpreting you, how they're interpreting poi, a little bit of both?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so I don't think there's just one answer to that, because I mean, the fact that I'm even talking to you all right now is because I made a piece of content that very clearly was not really about me at all, you know?
Right.
And, you know, a big part of why that happened, honestly, is just like, I love listening to podcasts about how businesses get started and how, and, you know, there's a part of me in like listening to those, like, I want to do that too. You know, I want to write an essay about like the rise and fall of this business and everything. That sounds cool. You want to take those tools that you're pulling in from other parts of the culture and reapply them here. So yeah, a part of that honestly was just wanting to flex that muscle and be like, you know, I have you know, a lot of the information in that video is stuff that was available to anyone. Like, I think the only thing in there that was privileged information was just that I had emailed Brian Lim directly and asked about whether the chip shortage was having an impact on their business. And he replied to me. And I think that's literally the only piece of information in that entire video that somebody could not have found by spending 3 hours Googling the history of Amazing Lights. Not a lot of the people wanted to spend 3 hours Googling the history of Amazing Lights at that point, as it turned out.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true.
But I do hear you saying that you did that because you wanted to. Because it was something that you wanted to do, that you wanted to go off and make that. Because I'm kind of touching back on, you know, you talking about individual personality branding.
Sure.
Where, you know, you didn't necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is you didn't necessarily make that because you felt the world needed to hear your opinion and you could give some, it was more so that you just wanted to, that you wanted to flex or, you know,
I mean,
kind of see more what I'm getting at, you know?
Yeah, if I'm going to be honest, it was a little bit of both. Like,
Okay.
I mean, I thought given the tools that I had, like, you know, I spend a lot of my time learning about how other businesses run, you know, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, etc. And I genuinely thought that it's like, I can give an analysis on this that I don't think anybody else can right now. And I, you know, there was certainly some ego involved in that for sure.
Sure.
But also too, it was a unique moment where I'm just like, you know, I could see in the gloving groups, people were having a moment over this and they were having some feels over this. And you know, part of it was just like, you know, I think a lot of people out there are feeling really uncertain. And if I can give them this tool for understanding how they got here, this might help quell some of that anxiety. This might, like, as much as it was me kind of thinking like, you know, hey, I'm pretty sure I can add something to this conversation that nobody else really can. There was also a certain level on which I'm like, I think this is going to be a comfort to people. I think this is going to serve people.
Certainly did.
Cool. I'm glad to hear it.
To see your outside perspective coming in, you speaking about it so eloquently, so it was very well done. I mean, I'm sure you saw a lot of the responses on it of a lot of glovers being like, thank you. It's not just us feeling this way, because it can be hard, you know, to know what's going on outside of your own head, outside of your own perspective on what's going on and things. So yeah, it's just reminding me, like, when I did my glove for glove video for Amazing Lights and they wanted me to talk about my mental health, at the time I was like, no one's gonna care. Come on, like, no, like, it's just, I don't think anyone's gonna care about some rando on your YouTube channel talking about how her brain doesn't work, like, it. And they pushed me. They were like, no, you need to do this. You need to do this. People are going to care because it's only your story. Like, people are going to care. And so I'm fine, and I did it, and I put my heart and soul into it. And to this day, I still have people reach out to me for it. So that was kind of one of those examples of like, stop thinking about whether or not someone will care and think about what value you bring to the conversation. And it was such a turning point and a jumping off point for me in gloving, where it was like, no, this is valuable because it's coming from me. So I guess that's more what I was kind of aiming at, is having the confidence in yourself as an individual brand can carry you so much further than any other company ever can.
No, for sure. And also, like, well, number one, I just want to say, like, I think it's incredible that you participated in that, because, you know, I have shared a few personal things online as well, and
vulnerability. You know, that was whoo.
Oh God Almighty! Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. So I really respect you for doing that, and I'm really glad that you did it. And I want to make sure that we that we stick a pin in that right quick, because it is hard. And you know, unpacking that to a broader point, to a certain extent, when you interact with people online, you have to be vulnerable in ways that, like, you know, I think a lot of us, especially when we first start off online, there's a version of ourselves that we want to kind of project out there into the world. And it tends to be that when we let down some of those defenses, when we reveal things about ourselves that we're perhaps not proud of or that we're a little bit afraid of, it gives people an opportunity to connect with us in ways that are not just comforting to us, but usually comforting to them as well.
Yeah, I've certainly experienced that. And kind of wrapping around, I'm hearing you kind of say, like, that's what we need to be focusing on, is we need to be focusing more so right now on kind of those individual vulnerabilities. And I've found, just in my own personal experience, that vulnerability gives your fan base a home.
Yeah.
An opportunity to connect.
Exactly. It builds the community.
It's an opportunity to connect. It's an opportunity to feel seen. You know, people want to feel seen. They want to feel like they're not alone. So having those vulnerabilities displayed to them, it offers them an area of connection that people don't tend to get with, air quotes, celebrities. You know, you don't tend to get that as much. It's why people are so much more feral for musicians than they are for actors a lot of the time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, musicians
wear their hearts on their sleeves, like very few entertainers. Maybe stand-up comedians would be like a little bit more down that road, but yeah,
kind of in between. But so
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so we need to be focusing more on our individual personalities right now to kind of recreate that sense of connection that we have with each other.
Absolutely. I also wanted to loop back, because there was something in that question that you asked about what motivates me that, like, I wanted to get to and I forgot. And I think it actually dovetails with this point very, very nicely. A big part of what motivates what I produce in terms of content is wanting to be of service to others. You know, when I talk about, like, wanting to answer questions or create something that gives people comfort, you know, there was an aha moment for me very early on when I was producing videos of realizing that the reason that people were coming back to them was that I was offering them something that was unique. And at the time, I thought it was just like I was traveling around a lot and I could show people tricks from people that didn't have access to video cameras so I could get ideas out there faster. But a part of that was also just like it gave people that really wanted to go hard on this stuff something new to work on every single week. And that was huge. When I sit down to think about what I want to put out there into the world, and specifically what I want my channels to be about, being of service to others is like the number one consideration. Like, when we think about what these online spaces are for, I think it has to start with what this does for the audience rather than what does this do for us.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very excellent point. But speaking of your video, there is one point in your video that really stuck with me, and it's been kind of like festering in my head. If you recall, you mentioned a symbiotic relationship between the EDM music industry and gloving, and how that was. And what kept coming back to me was what was happening during 2010 to like 2015. There was this massive explosion into the mainstream of EDM. I mean, we were seeing dubstep, rhythm, trance, house. Everything was just going mainstream. Pitbull was using it. J-Lo was using it. Everybody was using it. And it really started to stick to me that if it wasn't for EDM exploding, I don't think gloving would have been as big as it is now, because it kind of like swept up with it, because it, you know, a lot of the EDM stuff started in the rave culture, just like how gloving started in the rave culture, and it pushed itself into the mainstream. We didn't necessarily push ourselves into the mainstream, but we did take notice of trying to separate ourselves from the stigma, of course, but still rode on the coattails of the popularity of EDM. And it started to make more and more sense to me as I kept thinking about it, because how old were many people during 2010 who got into gloving? They were around 17 to 21. We were all very young. We found this thing that we latched onto, and it just kept on going, and we didn't really understand fully like what it was that we were a part of until very recently. So I do find that interesting. Did you, as part of the Poi community, actually see a similar trend of explosion of people into the hobby?
So I need to preface this by saying that I actually don't have good eyes on the kind of trajectory of the rave scene, because I've just never been a part of that scene. I got into flow arts by dint of going to Burning Man, and I've never actually been to a rave, and so I want to make sure that whatever I say next has that proviso to it, because y'all probably have better eyes on that than I do. All that said, so I can chart basically 3 periods of growth in the side of the flow arts that I've had eyes on. One of the biggest was the mainstreamification of Burning Man, honestly. When Burning Man became a thing that like wound up in the press every single year, that like, you know, we grew from 30,000 attendees to 70,000 attendees within like 5 years. And it became a thing that went from an underground party in the desert to like a cultural touchstone for somebody who is like a neo hippie, you know? That was where I encountered flow arts for the first time. And so with that mainstreamification, we definitely saw one burst of interest. The second was the proliferation of social media. Like the arrival of YouTube and then Instagram just had an absolutely massive impact on how easily people were able to discover what we did and learn it. Like, we're so fortunate that some of the first generation of flow artists that got on that channel used it to post tutorials, because that was not a thing that was given was going to be a format that worked when YouTube started up. It like just by sheer random coincidence, some people wound up having a format that worked, and it helped people learn how to get into the art. The third trajectory, yes, I think that the blowing up of the rave scene had an impact. The way that I finally became aware of this, honestly, is there is a fire festival that is hosted in New England every year. It used to have multiple events that were hosted per year called Wildfire. And I remember one year they actually scheduled one of their events the same week as Burning Man, and I thought that they were out of their freaking minds. I thought there was no way they were going to sell a single ticket, and it sold out. That was the moment when I realized that people were discovering flow arts through avenues other than Burning Man, and that like this had now become a completely different thing. I would honestly argue that most of the people who've come into the flow arts in the past 10 years have come into it through the rave scene. That is almost certainly where they've discovered it for the first time.
That makes sense.
What kind of impact did that have? Much of an impact, or did you see like a change in behaviors, or how did that what did that shift look like when the rave scene kind of came in? Because, it's always important to distinguish, poi is an ancient technique. This is an old cultural thing that has been around long before any of this. Yeah. So I'm just curious, what did you observe when the rave scene came in?
Sure. So number one, there was kind of, well, there were a few changes. There was a demographic shift. All of the sudden, like, it used to be that it was primarily people in their like mid to late 20s that you would see at the Flow and Fire festivals, and then all of a sudden you'd see teenagers showing up. That had never happened before. And we've kind of come full circle on that, where some of the kids that I met as teenagers coming to Flow festivals and me being like, "You old enough to be here?" have started their own events now, which is fantastic. Number two, there was a cultural shift. Like, I definitely noticed when the fashion shifted from like the kind of Mad Max inspired Burning Man stuff to the like really psychedelic screen printed stuff that is more indicative of rave culture. Number three, there was more interest in the music side of things. It used to be we didn't talk that much about the music, especially at Flow festivals. You got a fire circle for the night. That was the most important thing. And goodness, we're getting Yuta Imamura flying in from Japan, and we're getting Imakokode flying in from France, and they're going to teach us like super advanced. Also, are we?
Don't worry about the swearing. I always censor it, and
cool.
I like censored humor in that sense.
All right, cool. I'm normally really good about that.
No, you're good. You are totally fine.
Okay, cool. You can tell I spend a lot of time on camera that I even think about.
You and me both.
It used to be that the focus on was who's in the teaching lineup, and now there's a lot more interest in who's the music lineup. And we've seen a new generation of Flow and Fire events popping up in the past 5 years that are basically hybrids of music festivals and traditional fire festivals, where there's equal emphasis put on the music lineup as there is on the teaching lineup, which it's an interesting experiment, and I can't wait to see how it pans out over time. But yeah, also there were some things that changed about the style of what people were spinning too, because of course, most stuff that shows up at raves, the entire idea is to do it in as small a space as possible, because you're having to deal with people careening all around you, especially with props that take up more room like hoops and poi and the like. And you would see like maybe a specialized subset of people that would like really specifically aim to get on a stage and perform up there so that they could open up more. But yeah, you saw things like gunslingers entering into the poi world, which was basically there was almost a solid decade there where nobody was doing any tether manipulations. And then John Alvarez, who was a glow stringer, comes in and shows us how to do gunslingers, and starts a revolution. There was definitely some stuff in terms of the vocabulary of tricks that followed. And then there's been kind of a division in culture between what I would call the circus-based spinners and the kids that have come in from raves, where one is more performance-heavy and about just doing the most virtuosic stuff possible. There's a heavy emphasis on juggling, and then the rave kids tend to be more about like finding flow and like being more chill with it. And these two come to loggerheads a lot. So it's led to some internal divisions, which honestly almost certainly would have happened anyway. But those are just the two ways that I can most easily distinguish those two camps in my head and point to ways that it reconnects with that question. But so those are the things I can think of off the top of my head.
Have you noticed any of the drug stigma come your way because that's one of the biggest things that really does not help gloving when it comes to like trying to get kids to see it, trying to bring in like that younger, hungrier audience, is that we have the drug stigma on top of us at all times. I mean, when I go to raves and I have gloves on, over half of the people that approach me ask me if I'm selling something, as opposed to, can I have a, oh, it's bad. It is bad. Like,
So
or how
bad.
how many times I've pulled gloves out at like a house party or a holiday party, something that was definitely not a rave, and I started gloving a bit, and what's the first thing people say? Oh, I wish I was on acid. I wish I was on this, so that like there's this bizarre, I mean, it's not bizarre, it makes sense, but it's just frustrating that there's this blockade for a lot of people that don't know what gloving is, that they think they need to be on some kind of substance in order, because they've never seen gloving being done as a full style of dance. So I'm just curious, with that rave insurgence, did the poi community experience any of that as well?
So that had already been happening in the poi community even before then, and I don't know if this happens in the gloving community, but like one of those things that actually kind of frustrates me about the poi community is the degree to which people will actually feed into it themselves. Like, you get on some of the poi message boards and somebody will be like, how do I get motivated to do this, or how do I do this trick? And there will always be somebody who gets on there and is like, go take 3 hits of acid and it'll just come together for you, my man. And it's just like, yeah,
We have that
come
too.
on. Yeah. So yes, we absolutely have that element to it. Interestingly enough, there is definitely a strain in the poi and many flow arts communities of like it kind of taking pride in being pro substance. Like, there's a guy I know who like swears that flow arts is in and of itself an attempt to have a psychedelic experience. I do not agree with this. I think that there's a lot of ways that you can participate in this stuff that don't involve deliberately seeking a different state of consciousness. And even if that is what you're doing it for, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's being done in a recreational fashion, you know? I think that in a lot of cases, people in the poi world don't look at that as being a stigma. They look at it as like confirmation of an internal sense of self, which is something that's very strange to me. Cards on table, I don't do any of these things. I haven't taken any psychedelics deliberately since my second Burning Man back in like 2008 or 9. And I think that's not only made me a better poi spinner, but also like I think that it's there are some times when I think that the position that I occupy in the community is a feature of the fact that I'm different rather than a bug, you know?
Yeah,
I can definitely relate. Go ahead, Peter.
I was just gonna say, no, I see exactly where his idea is coming from when you actually take the term psychedelic as mind manifestation kind of deal, and trying to achieve that in a natural way without actually having to take a substance to get to that point. I see where he was coming from on that, and I definitely see where you kind of start to differ in terms of opinion.
Sure. And also, to be clear, this is not me saying never take substances. This is me saying that there's a whole lot of reasons why people get into this, and stigma around this is one of those challenges that we face.
Sure, it's not to say that it's bad. It's that sometimes an overinvestment in that side of it can create that sort of stigma from the outside eye.
Well, and also it's a choice, and if we don't make it as legitimate a choice to say no as it is to say yes, then we haven't actually changed anything about how we're looking at this as a culture.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that as well. The other thing I definitely want to say is when a lot of people indulge themselves, as I'm just going to put it, into things like psychedelics and substances and stuff like that, our vernacular is different than when we are in a sober state of mind. And one of the things that what was the reason why I pushed to make my channel and do my content was I wanted people to start having a conversation on an analytical level that you don't have to be in a particular state of mind in order to have a conversation about it and actually start to dissect and find all these little interconnecting parts that make gloving the entity that it is.
Sure.
So it's very interesting to see that a lot of people who take that moment to kind of stop going through their Rumspringer years, as my mom refers to it, to actually start to take a step back and actually start looking at their art and then realizing, yes, there is a lot more there than what appears on the surface. And that, to me, is the essence of art. So...
Absolutely. No. And there are so many tools for understanding that, and it is useful to know that there are so many tools for understanding that.
Yes, exactly. So I definitely loved it that we actually got that kind of input, and definitely like to see the parallels that us as glovers have with a greater flow arts community like poi, hooping, and so on. So I think our next question is that what do you think is our biggest obstacle in trying to bring in new people? Because I feel like our sense of discovery is just invisible.
Yeah. I would definitely agree that discovery, like, going back to, this is one of the first things we talked about, going back to the funnel, getting people to the first level of that funnel, because you're only going to get like maybe 1 in 10 of them to get past that first level in the first place. So if, let's say for the sake of argument, that you see that like maybe 10,000 people see gloving for the first time this year, you're going to get like 1,000 of them that will maybe get to the curious part, and it'll be like 1/10 of that wind up actively becoming glovers. So how do you put it in front of more eyeballs? I don't know if it's going to wind up in the edit or not, but sorry, there was something you asked me like very, very early on about the performance challenges of gloving.
The intimacy of gloving is kind of like, it's one of our greatest weaknesses as well as one of our greatest strengths, in that intimacy is hard to translate to a larger audience.
Because it happens in such a small and intimate area, as opposed to, poi or rope dart that are kind of ideally suited for a stage just because they take up so much space. But in order to make gloving read for a mass audience, by definition, you're taking away some of the intimacy that it carries with it as an art. So how do you connect those dots? Well, so that's the rub, right? And again, I don't know that I have an answer for this. I think that, there's definitely an association. So choices have to be made in this, because like you have to decide, do you want gloving attached to rave culture? Because that's going to have a big impact on the choices you make in terms of where is gloving going to be seen. I honestly think one of the smartest moves that Brian Lim ever made was like creating the IGC, was creating that competition that is specifically geared around creating media for it. We've had people experiment with creating competitions in the poi world, and the thing that it always falls apart on is that nobody ever does this with an eye towards creating media or content around it. It's literally people show up, they compete, they get their prize, and nobody has the slightest idea that it happened. Like, the whole point of winning a competition, right, is that people know that you won it. And it's weird having that happen and it just like falling into a black hole. Let's be real though, competitions are somewhat of a hard sell among people that flow arts might appeal to for a variety of reasons. In a lot of cases, it's people that want to be seen but don't know how to put words into that. There's a lot of neurodivergent people that are in the flow arts that might have a complicated relationship with being seen in that regard and being in competition with others, and that is 100% valid. Competitions are also if you do it right, competitions are a great way to build the visibility of a thing, because you can go out into the outside world and say, hey, these are the masters of our art form. Check these people out. And there is a cachet that comes with that does appeal to people outside of that niche. for many years, I was doing a Poi top 10 list on my channel for New Year's every year, where people would vote on who their favorite Poi spinners were that year. And a thing that I was not expecting to have happen with that, because I was just doing it for fun at first, was that it kind of became a document for the outside world of like, these are the important players. And people who made that list got opportunities that people that did not make that list did not. That creates stratification, which, yes, there can be a red flag there, for sure. So what are some options for increasing visibility that do not involve raves and do not involve competitions? Well, I think, so here's a few things off the top of my head. As much as I despise TikTok as a platform, which vertical video just kills me. I can't do it, but here,
Yep.
that's the day and age we live in.
Welcome to your like-minded group right here. We all don't feel the same. We hate vertical. It's
We
I'm
hate
a-
it. Oh my god.
I'm
I
a
tried to
film guy, so
Dude, I tried to sit down and record in vertical, and albeit I was minorly successful because I got like 3 like 20-second clips out of it.
Yeah.
But I felt like 5 years of skill just evaporated off of me the second I had to put the camera back even further, and like
Yeah.
I felt like I lost all of my skill with that. And
Sure.
so yeah, TikTok is the future. We don't really have a choice in that. But one thing I heard you kind of touching on unintentionally, what I heard is actually kind of one of our greatest strengths is how much producing light show videos matter to gloving. It
Yes.
matters a lot. We have wells of content of people making videos, especially for the online competitions, that the whole point of the competition is creating the media. So we we have a strength above a lot of other flow arts that we don't realize we have, and that's how much content we're actually creating and putting out, even just for fun. Because what I'm
Absolutely.
hearing from you is that Poi spinners don't like to record like we do.
I don't know that that's necessarily true. Lots of Poi spinners do like to record.
Okay.
I would say that there's more of a community around that on Instagram than on TikTok necessarily right now. But part of that is because of specifically the thing that I think gloving might be a good fit for on TikTok, which is that like TikTok is intimate.
You're right. It is.
Like the whole point of that is that you are in a close space with another person. The content that does best on that platform is when you are in somebody's world and they're like telling you something, they're giving you a lesson, what have you. And you know, all of the standard rules for getting seen on that platform are things that gloving is kind of ideally suited for. Is there a brand new song that just came out that everybody's creating dances to? Hey, let's create a gloving TikTok challenge, you know? It is, you know, it's taking memes, and like so much of the community around TikTok is about taking a meme that everybody knows and showing your unique twist on it. Glovers are in a perfect position to do that.
yeah, I think it's one of those things where, like for example, I am like the worst offender in this regard, right? Because like I make stuff, but I like the act of making stuff. I don't like the act of posting stuff at all. In fact,
Nobody
the only
does.
reason the only reason I keep a Facebook is so I can be in touch with the gloving community. And over the years, I've even started to use Facebook less and less, to the point where the only social media I really have on my phone is YouTube, because I'd much rather, because like I said, I'm at heart a film dude. Like I'd much rather watch movies or listen to a guy talk about Hong Kong action movies for 3 hours. But I think that's also the thing, right? Like going back to what I said before, we have a lot of like people who are a bit older in this community. Like when I say that, I mean like in our 20s, and a lot of us grew up with Facebook, right?
Sure.
So for someone like me who already is like already not like often engaged online like that, trying something like TikTok or even Instagram for someone like me is just it can seem like a big ask, right? But Sari, going back to what you said, you are also correct in the fact that even someone like me who doesn't post as often, there's still a lot of videos in my backlog. So think about someone like Dustin who's posting all the time. We do have a huge well of content. I think it's just one of those things where we have to find ways to basically encourage people either through just word of mouth or through some sort of social engineering to just do what you've been doing, but just kind of recontextualize how we've been doing it.
Yeah. Can I ask right quick? Do you do any keyword targeting on your content?
Me, when I was trying out a lot of Instagram, I found that I was getting the most amount of engagement on Instagram more than posting on Facebook through Glover's Lounge and all those other groups, and more through YouTube, which again is like my preferred avenue. I did. The one thing I found to be both a strength and a weakness through Instagram, however, was the fact that it was much more decentralized, right? Like through gloving, with Glover's Lounge, like there is a chance to be in some ways more intimate because it is kind of framed more like a forum, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Instagram, it like those kind of discussions are kind of on a content by content basis. And sure, you might find someone you connect with through those discussions and you might add them. I've had that happen a couple of times, but it's one of those things where I think, again, it's kind of like one thing that we as a community might have to kind of recontextualize our relationship with social media tools. If we want to grow larger, by default, regardless, it is going to be a bit more decentralized. Kind of what you were talking about, the Koi community. There kind of has become a split division, right, with these two camps. And regardless if anything's going to grow, you're kind of going to have that, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those things where, as a community, like, we're gonna have to kind of have that discussion, like how are we going to recontextualize our relationship with these social media platforms.
For sure.
And with any kind of like hashtags or keywords or anything along those lines, just for myself personally, it feels like throwing darts blindfolded. You really have no idea what's gonna stick. You know, and so if we do something like hashtag gloving, like that might help other glovers find more gloving content, but we're really ultra stuck in GL visibility and then, you know, EL's YouTube visibility. So when we figure it out, we'll be sure to let everybody know. But yeah, as of right now, it kind of feels like wandering in the dark, and random stuff just works sometimes, which is the nature of the algorithm these days.
Yeah, definitely. I'd actually like to throw out a challenge to y'all and anybody who might be watching / listening when this when this airs, because there's an experiment I've been wanting to try now for a while, and I haven't been able to get any other poi spinners on board for it. But so it essentially looks like this. You know how, like, when you create a YouTube video, there's like the tags and everything, and you want to make sure that the tags, like, the same words appear in the title, description, tags, and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's basically like, what are people going to be searching for that they're going to find this particular video, right? So YouTube does this really interesting thing where it kind of builds silos based around people that have content that all hit the same keywords. Because YouTube's ultimate aim, of course, is to increase watch time. So you tend to find that people who use similar keywords then will have their videos recommended on other videos in that same niche, right? Now, I think it'd be a really interesting experiment to get, say, like 5 or 6 people that are all willing to, say, like, agree on a pool of keywords that they're going to target for like 2 or 3 months at a time, like creating tutorials, creating, like, I don't know, reacts videos, or even just performance videos. And they're all going to share those keywords. The idea being that you create your own little silo there. You create this community that because my theory here is that you can actually build everybody's watch time by having this common set of words that you're all drawing upon. Because the words don't just have an impact on coming up in search. They also have an impact on what gets recommended afterwards. And it still counts as a win in the YouTube algorithm if, after watching one of your videos, it recommends another video that keeps you on the platform. It's total watch time that it's looking for, not necessarily total watch time on your particular channel. So, anybody out there wants to try this out, I think that might be an interesting way to try and build some online community on that platform.
So I think that is a fantastic idea. I don't know if that's a discussion we want to have now. But if not, that's totally okay. I'm sure that we can link up through a messenger group at some point and maybe think up a couple keywords, because I think that's a great idea.
It's certainly a puppet discussion as well.
Oh yeah, I know that he's been on that game for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, like, I even took like advice from Kevin himself when he says to post natively to GL. But here's the thing, my analytics went completely down the toilet when I started doing that for my YouTube. And when I actually had I thought it was an emergency, but it didn't turn out to be that bad. I just shared my link to the YouTube and my numbers came right back to where they were beforehand. So I'm like, you know what? I am not going to post natively to GL anymore, because it actually did kill. Like, I understood where he was coming from, because EL kind of told him that to help with his reach and stuff.
Yeah, they told us that.
But I don't think that works anymore, because I think when he was told that was like, what, 2014, 2015? This is 2023 now. Things are completely different. The algorithm has turned into a completely different monster than what we knew back then.
Right.
It's not nice to us.
No,
Yeah, the algorithm is not nice to us right now. And we kind of can't really figure out why. We'll make like the tiniest change and drop will go down, and then we'll be like, I'm just gonna put this out because I want to, and then that one will skyrocket. And so this is why we have a lot of these questions, is because like through individual of our own research, we can't find consistencies.
And that's because there isn't a lot. Like,
okay.
I'm trying to remember which YouTuber it was that pointed this out, but like essentially algorithms for most platforms change so rapidly that it is impossible. Like, and there's actually a good reason for this, because, one of those things that goes wrong with a legacy platform that's been around forever is that you wind up with a few key players that have been in it for a long time and have built up their engagement over time, and they kind of crowd out the people that are just starting up. So if you're changing the rules of the algorithm pretty regularly, it means that nobody can become an expert in it fast enough before the algorithm changes again. That actually creates opportunities for new people coming in to build their own brands on the platform. And so it makes it just a little bit less unfair overall. The challenge is there, though, that we are all literally having to relearn the lesson book every year or two.
Yeah, I kind of feel like how my mom feels, because she's in law, and about every other year they have to go take a course to learn all the new changes within the law, especially in her case, she's in family law. And that field of law is so volatile in terms of changes that she's surprised that she's been able to stay in it for over 20 years. So yeah. I think that's one of the other things as well, is that a lot of Glovers just don't really consider the algorithm being a thing that is either working towards or against us. And like Sari said, I feel like it's working against us more than anything.
Especially now, just because within the recent shift of like Reels, TikTok, that kind of thing, your window of opportunity to grab someone's attention is getting shorter and shorter. Isn't it like 1.6 seconds now or something like that? Like, it keeps getting shorter, that you have this amount of time in the beginning of your video to catch someone's attention, or you're probably not going to get the full watch time for it. So that
Well,
has so rapidly shifted for us as well, because a lot of our videos and our contents, they're like stories, you know, they're full immersive experiences. So
Totally. Well, and you know that there's a term that gets thrown around in the business world really often of like the value proposition. This is something that you have to give in presentations. Like within the first minute, you have to like basically give a promise to the person of what value they're going to get by continuing to watch your thing through to the end. This is why so many YouTube videos actually start with the most important part of the video and then give you the story of how they got there.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty traditional journalism technique as well, right?
Yeah.
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 Look at Dateline.
Totally. So like finding those storytelling techniques that work for where attention spans happen to be is really, really crucial, just like in general. And it doesn't matter what platform you happen to be on. It just, depending upon the platform, you're working with a different window of that attention. You know, I want to say it's something like you have to have your hook within the first 15 seconds on YouTube. It has to be within the first 5 seconds on Instagram. And yeah, I think it's like a second and a half is what you get on TikTok at this point. Which makes for a fun challenge when you're editing videos and you're trying to take the same content and make it work cross-platform, because you have to do very, very different things to get it to land on all those different platforms too.
Yeah, and if I recall, they all have their own form of an algorithm. So you're not only learning one algorithm, you're learning a plethora of different ones, because they all have such vastly different catering moments, I guess is the word I'll use, to whatever audience that they cultivate. Like long form is YouTube, short form is TikTok, Reels with Instagram and photos works for that. So it's really trying to learn not necessarily how each algorithm works. It's kind of learning the commonalities between all of them that kind of works, and take that as a rising tides raise all ships kind of situation.
Sure, and also deciding which platforms support the work that you're doing in the community that you want to create. Like, you don't have to be on every platform, and it can be exhausting to be on every platform, but which are those platforms that create the conversations that you want to have?
Yeah, speaking of platforms, I just have to ask, have you used Twitter for your content? And if so, how did that work for you? I was just curious, because as Glovers, we all kind of come to the consensus Twitter is not for us and we don't want to touch it. So I'm very curious to hear that from outside.
It's worked for like 1 or 2 people and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say that you have almost certainly reached the correct conclusion there. There are some ways that I want to experiment with Twitter that I think I might be able to like make it work for some specific projects or some specific ways I want to interact with people. But yeah, by and large, people go to Twitter because it's an extended version of the content section on a YouTube video, you know? It's basically a series of message boards, more or less, and we kind of moved away from that with how we talk about movement arts and more specifically flow arts a while ago. I will also say that is something that I treasure about Twitter, because I post stuff on Twitter that I would not post anywhere else when I'm having unguarded moments where I want to talk about this or that thing happening in culture, and I don't want to have a bunch of people getting up in my face about it.
That's actually very interesting to hear. And I'm not entirely sure if it was just because of the reputation that Twitter had in the early days as well, which was always never been good. But I know a lot of people now probably don't want to touch it just because there's so much stuff happening with Twitter in terms of shifting, in terms of their policies, in terms of the user interface is changing, as far as I can tell. And the funny thing is that so many people don't even be on Twitter to know what's going on with Twitter, because everyone's talking about it everywhere else.
Yep, agreed. Twitter is such a bizarre little microcosm because it's the smallest of the major platforms, and yet it carries such like, and I think these two things are related, because like Twitter is a place where people who have a lot of influence go to dump hot takes that lack nuance because they have to in order to stay in 240 characters, right? And because this is a place where people who, are considered by our culture to be movers and shakers, and thus it is a very small community of people, are saying things kind of off the cuff and without much nuance, it means that you can get a lot of press out of that too. So the press footprint of it is without a doubt out of proportion to what I think is actually the impact of the platform.
Good to know. For all of our listeners, take note, please.
Don't blame me if you find success on Twitter, though. God, there was a Facebook post I did 2 years ago outlining like, okay, here's all the problems with how TikTok operates and like why the algorithm is going to be something that people are going to struggle with in the coming years. And then I had somebody who read that went and like posted a video and came back so angry with me because she's like, oh, I got 1,000 views. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, okay, did you pay the rent with those 1,000 views? Are you still getting those 1,000 views? Like, what?
Yeah, I even for me,
What a weird thing to be angry about.
yeah,
Tell me about it, right?
I was successful, so I'm mad at you. Like,
Parasocial relationships are so weird.
yeah, and I mean, like for me, like what I feel like has been like the biggest hits on my channel is when I actually go into gloving styles and break down what makes up that style. And I think, well, still to this day, my biggest one is the morphing video, but the one that people talk about the most with me is my platforming one. When it comes to me actually covering gloving styles, I think there's such a stronger interest in it because people realize there's so many different variations that you can go with gloving, and people kind of just want to see what we have. And that's
Sure.
why I'm very, very excited when I get done with my editing on my impacting video, because impacting is as synonymous to gloving as gloving itself. And it's just very interesting to see like what people kind of are starting to gravitate towards in terms of gloving, or content about gloving, not gloving content necessarily.
Sure.
But yeah, that's one of the other things that I feel like is another hurdle for me, is trying to figure out how I take that and condense it down into a 15-second video. Especially something like morphing.
Honestly, I think it's one of those things for you, Peter, where you just have to find the moments in your video specifically that has a solid beginning, middle, end. This is just more me being like someone who's really into narrative stuff, right? Like you do have this macro beginning, middle, and end, but within that you have a bunch of these micro versions of that. I think you just haven't figured out what that looks like in your videos yet, but I can guarantee you they're probably there.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not deeply immersed in the gloving world, but I've seen videos that do this same thing with musical genres, and the way that it tends to be done is you'll find an example that is like so deep inside of this particular world that like it's immediately recognizable that there's a style there within like 5 seconds, and you edit the order of it so that you get as much contrast with every edit as possible, so you can see as much difference as possible between each example.
Definitely need to write that one down as well.
I have a bit of a hot question that I like to ask people.
Ooh, do tell.
It's a bit spicy just because of my answer to this question.
Okay.
I do not consider gloving a flow art. I consider it a style of dance. Do you consider it a flow art?
So, I was actually considering making a video on this.
Yes.
I honestly, I'll say it here now, make the video. We would love to see it.
Yeah, just make the video. Just make the video, because the amount of people I have pissed off by saying I do not consider gloving a flow art, and the reason for that is when you take away the prop, the performance remains.
Ooh,
That's why I don't.
Point.
That's why I don't consider it, because if, with poi, with staff, with all of the rest of the flow arts, take away the prop, there is no performance. But with gloving, take away the prop, or better yet, you can't take away the prop, it's our hand. So that's my first point as to why gloving is not a flow art, and my second point is we are not combating gravity. We're not in like an actual state of manipulation of, like, to me, whenever I've felt that flow state kind of thing that people are talking about, I have felt it spinning orbit. I have felt it spinning poi. I've never felt it in gloving, and maybe that's just like how my brain works, but yeah, the amount of people I've made very mad by saying that. And they're like, no, gloving's a flow art because it's the LEDs and it's enmeshed in flow arts culture enough. But yeah, so I'm just curious as to how you feel on that.
Well, first and foremost, you don't know that you just volunteered for me to like do a Zoom call with you when I make that video now, because that was so good, and
Sounds
there
good.
is absolutely no chance that I'm going to parrot you on that. So I want that coming from your mouth and not mine. Oh, that was fantastic. Good Lord. Whew. Yes. Good job there. So here's the funny thing about the way you're framing it, though. Like, I see the way that I do poi as a dance art too. Like, for so many people that do poi, they see it as like a skill toy, and like I said, there's been this kind of shift in the community since like 2012 or so to try and integrate it into the circus world with like a really, really heavy emphasis on juggling and things like that, and probably to the detriment of traffic to my channel. That just wasn't something that I was interested in. Connecting back with something that you said in there, though, like the center point of my philosophy towards dancing with poi is that I turn it into an extension of my body. That, like, for all intents and purposes, it is an embellishment of what I'm expressing through my body. And gloving definitely has that in common. All that said, though, I am fighting with gravity, and that's part of why I love poi so much, and why people are constantly trying to get me to pick up other props. And I'm just like, but this doesn't do it for me the same way fighting with gravity as a dance does, you know?
That's an interesting take. I would say that. It's an interesting take.
You just pushed the ball right back in my court with that one.
Oh,
outstanding.
Well, and I know what you mean. A really good friend of mine is more of a dance style poi spinner as opposed to a skill prop, and he's talked about this before. LLB Tadpole, he's talked a lot about how he started spinning, and I think he started spinning long before he started gloving, and he's got much more of that kind of dance to it, and I prefer when he teaches me poi techniques because it kind of like makes sense in a full body synergy as opposed to just like I'm spinning these things and controlling these things. And when I put myself in that mindset, I hit myself in the face way less. Way less. So, geez, you just opened up a whole other rabbit hole that the poi is an embellishment of your dance, which is exactly what gloving is. So,
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, which is not to say I think that your interpretation is wrong by any means. Like, you are right that, like, but here's the thing: is if I removed the poi, the dance absolutely would not be the same. And one of those things that is an enormous challenge for me personally, because like so much of my style of poi dance centers around adapting elements of contemporary modern dance to poi, is that I'm very specifically using the momentum that I can create with the poi to do things with my body that I couldn't do in contemporary modern dance. Stuff that, like, I could try it, but I would have a really difficult time connecting these two pieces because my body by itself doesn't have the momentum to do it. I need another 2 feet of arm in either direction in order to connect those dots.
Right. Like I can't do this with my hands. You know, if I want my hand to look like it's falling, I have to actually animate it in that way.
Oh, totally. No, there was a great piece of choreography that I wrote. I say great piece of choreography. No, there was a piece of choreography that I wrote a few weeks ago that, like, it literally was about me feeling disconnected from things, and the way that I was expressing that was super on the nose, where I was creating lines with my hands in poi, and I was breaking those lines. I was very deliberately, putting the other arm through one of those lines, or dropping the poi in specific places where it felt deliberately uncomfortable. And that's a thing that I couldn't do without the poi. Which, I think is kind of cool, honestly, because, if I were just replicating the same kind of dance that I could do without poi with poi, then what would be the point? Like if you're gonna learn this particular art and you're gonna embellish this particular art, I really think part of the journey there is finding out what are the things that I can do with this art that I can't do with anything else. What can I say with poi that I can't say with contemporary modern? What can I say with poi that I can't say with gloves? I think that that's a big challenge. And what can I say with gloves that I can't say with just my hands?
I actually find that is a very interesting point that you bring that up, because there are people who say it's a flow art, and then you have people like Sari who say that it's a dance. I'm the type of person who sees it as a nexus between these two, because there are people who focus on the flow art aspects with all the trails and all the dynamics that they can do with their flails and things like that. But then you also have people who go into a much more technical approach that a lot of dancers bring to the table. So there's this weird, it's just like this weird nexus point where two different aspects of life meet together and can create something completely new in its own right. And you can take it in either direction. You can go more dance or you can go more flow arts. And so
sure.
I just find it so
Tech
interesting
versus
to hear
flow.
that.
We're not going to have that debate.
Oh boy.
No, that debate is it's dead. It's gone.
Does that exist in the gloving community too? Or
all
is it
the
just
time. All the time.
It comes back up like a meme.
It comes up all the time.
So I think the true measure of whether it's a flow art is whether people debate tech versus flow. I'm not gonna lie. Congratulations, I'm sorry.
Congratulations, we're a flow art. Okay.
Oh man.
Oh god. Well, and we were talking about how much the rave perspective changed within, and I'm starting to hear kind of that parroted in that conversation, is that there's a lot of this debate that has within the confines of the raving argument rather than the confines of like the general embellishment of the dance. Man, you've opened up such a rabbit hole in my mind. I'm not sure of the answer to this question anymore.
Oh, I feel bad now because your answer is so good.
That's why I asked it, because I'm not here to be the definitive my definition is correct. It's like
Neither am I.
I guess
you notice how much work I've put into not answering that question yet?
I mean, there's a reason why I haven't said anything for the past 10 minutes, is because for me, Peter, one of the first episodes I think we got on, I literally said something along the lines of, at the end of the day, what even defines gloving? And to me, the only thing that defines it is that you are dancing with a pair of gloves with lights on them.
Yeah.
And then, all of the things we've built up as a culture are more culturally accepted norms at this point that we've built together, right? But at the end of the day, there are deconstructionist thought on that too, right? It doesn't have to be just the way we've been doing things, because Sari, contrary to your experience, from me, I've always literally felt a flow when I glove, and I think a part of that for me comes from the fact that a lot of my early history, even before gloving, I did a lot of martial arts, right? And a lot of that is learning about the manipulation of this conceptual energy that is traveling your body. Often it's what helps me with some of my specific animations and my whole body forms when I do it. And I found it interesting because for me, you mentioned the act of gravity, which I totally agree with, but for me, I've always thought of the fact that there are certain ways to emulate that element from flow arts. For example, when we're doing our flails, especially when we have lights on, that literal weight, for me,
I've often play spin.
It literally is, right? So I'm often just especially like when I'm doing some pedals, like like I put all of my weight at the tips of my fingers as I'm like drawing the pedals.
Sure.
But yeah, like that's the whole thing, right? And Drex is probably why you, like you said, spent so much time like basically not answering the question, because like at the end of the day, like what our arts really are really very simplistic definitions that have cultural ties to them. So it's like I think the fun part in later stages of certain arts is finding that interdisciplinary nature where it can connect to like literally 50 other things, right?
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious if this answer will resonate with you, where for a long time I've been describing flow arts not as a specific movement art, but as a philosophy towards movement art. I think when I look at flow arts, what I see is, in a lot of respects, kind of a synthesis of a lot of different things, because there's elements of dance, there's elements of martial arts, there's elements of skill toys and juggling and circus and all that. But what unites all those things under the banner of what I think of as flow arts is that it is something that is specifically done in a kind of both expressive but also introspective kind of fashion. It is something that is done so that you have a relationship with this prop or whatever you happen to be working with. Your hands can be the prop. Goodness only knows there's been a lot of there've been some really incredible performances asking the question of what even is a prop to begin with. But ultimately, the uniting thing that I see there is people who take this up as an act of like self-interrogation, self-improvement, meditation, or self-challenge. You know, it's taking a lot of traditional things and recontextualizing them in such a fashion that it kind of becomes a way that you can simultaneously exist both with those traditions as well as be present in the moment and give yourself challenges for the future.
Very eloquently put. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry to derail us on that. I'm like,
No, it's great.
I always ask other genre flow artists that question.
No. I really appreciate that. Honestly, you gave me a lot to think about there too. That was such a great answer.
Well, and I guess another, not to tangent this too far, but do you, you as poi spinners, and are we part of you? How do you see us? Like, are we like the
Yeah.
Are we like the little, like, are we like the redheaded stepchild of everything, where you guys are like, oh, the Glovers, or like how
Oh
does
boy,
the
here
rest
they
of the
come.
floor arts world, right? Like how does the rest of the floor arts world see us?
So I
It's
will.
okay to be mean. We're mean to ourselves too.
We're mean to ourselves.
No,
it's
it's all
okay if it's mean.
So I will give you the short answer first and then the long answer. The short answer is that I think the title is open to anybody who wants to take it. And if they don't want to take it, then they don't have to. If y'all want to think of yourselves as being part of the flow arts and as being a, cousin art to poi, I don't see a problem with that. Like, not only can we make an argument that there's some inspiration going back and forth there with the flails as you've shown, but also too, if there are elements of flow philosophy that resonate with you, then why not, The longer answer, because goodness only knows, I don't think I've given a short answer to a single question on here, but no, so for me personally, where I sit, I see a lot of commonalities. I also see a lot of things that don't resonate with me personally. Like, I will say that when I went out to IGC and I met you and all of the other sponsored artists and all the other kids that showed up to IGC that year, I keep referring to people as kids, and people keep telling me that I should stop doing it. So I'm gonna put a note on that one for myself. All the other people that showed up to IGC, it was really a shock to me to experience the ways that gloving culture holds that kind of intimacy that flow arts doesn't. It was it was something that like the first light show I got, and I think you were actually there for that. That was in the studio when y'all were on camera.
Who gave you that show? Do you remember?
I don't remember, and I feel so bad because this guy was so excited to give me my first light show, and I cannot remember his name now for the life of me.
I hope to God somebody puts it in the comment section so we know.
Was it George? I think it might have been George.
Might have been George.
George
Yeah.
or Andrew, I think.
Yeah. So.
Anyway.
Well, so it was wild because when I walked in, y'all were recording this stuff on that camera with the fisheye lens and everything, and there were a bunch of people clustered around the computer, and there was somebody performing in front of that. I think it was actually you performing on camera when I got in. I remember you having this like really intense look on your face as you were watching the playback. No, and so when the topic of like, hey, who wants to give Drex a light show came up, and I sat down. And we'll say it was George. As George comes up to me, as he's coming towards me, I'm just like, this is really up in my business. What's about to happen here? Like, I was really uncomfortable for a minute or two there. I did not know what was about to happen because that is just so different from the way that
here.
Spinner. Yeah.
We are right here.
No, and the weirdest part of it to me was just like, that's so normal for you all that like, as I was sitting there feeling really uncomfortable as I was sitting down, y'all are just like, leaning in there, ready for it, like so excited and everything. I'm just like, I feel bad for being uncomfortable right now.
No, you shouldn't. I mean, I remember one of the first in-person play shows I got, I almost threw up, so you're good. You kept it together.
Yes, and the light show was delightful. I did enjoy it. It took me a little while to get acclimated there. But the long and short of that is that there are certain elements of gloving culture that feel very alien to me as a poi spinner. But at the same time, there are elements to other flow arts that feel incredibly alien to me as well. There's definitely been no shortage of aerial artists that have described themselves as flow artists. And, that is an entire world and technique that I barely understand. And at the same time, I totally understand why they place themselves in that category. And I can also understand why glovers would place themselves in that category. So for me personally, I don't have a problem with glovers calling themselves flow artists. I don't know if it is my job to place benediction on that or not. But there are elements of it that feel very radically outside of what I'm used to seeing in flow arts. And I also totally admit that that might be a limitation of my own experiences.
It's good. It's good things to consider.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's no small part that poi actually has a very strong influence in gloving when it comes to flail dynamics. If it wasn't for poi having such a long storied history of how they go about their dynamics, I don't think we would have such an advancement on flails or even have the category of flails be a thing,
Yeah.
And the ones that teach pedal flails, as we call them, they're poi spinners. Like they're translating your technique into this. Like basically glovers went, wait a minute, I know what this looks like.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, now we can do these things. So we just, speaking for myself personally, I just feel like we, as glovers, often feel like the little kid at the adults' Thanksgiving table,
I can see that, yeah. No, and it has to be said, too, that the way a lot of flow and fire festivals are built don't really cater that well to glovers. There's not spaces there that I think are terribly welcoming to glovers, and maybe that's something that we should look at.
Well, I think, personally, one of the things that myself and others have been, like several others like myself, McKinley, and Kevin have been doing more recently, is trying to take more of a larger approach to our scales when it comes to performances, right? Like doing some full body stuff. I've said in the past that gloving can go full body because if we look at the all styles dance scene, right? We have tutters and finger stylists who are standing up and who are traversing the battlefield essentially, right? So it is possible, and I actually love there their approach to body mechanics, because you can be as expressive as someone like TuT, or you can be as minimalist like Roga, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those things where, again, we're already in this time for gloving where things are kind of up in the air, and I know like it can kind of be scary, but I also think it's exciting because it is possibly an opportunity for people to recontextualize their relationships with this thing that we're doing.
Yeah. So that actually kind of reminds me of something that came up in my research of doing the video on the history of the amazing lights that poi and gloving does have in common. I ran across an old interview with Brian Lim where he was talking about the whole reason that he got into gloving was that once he put on the gloves, it instantly made people interested in what he was doing, despite the fact that he considered himself a terrible dancer. There was a really, really fascinating conference call that I was on several years ago where one of the people on the call pointed out that one of the biggest reasons why people pick up props and begin to spin poi or any other prop is that it gives your body permission to move. There are people that are enormously self-conscious about their bodies and about moving their bodies, and yet there's something about adding this element of the other into it that suddenly breaks down a wall and can get them to move, and it can become a gateway into moving other parts of their body as well. And I think that there is definitely some potential there within gloving to create that same kind of almost step-by-step process of going from, I have the gloves on, so, this now takes the attention off of the rest of me, and I can like entertain people, or I can entertain myself, and I can express myself in this way, and then gradually expanding that out to different parts of your body and finding ways to turn your entire body into an instrument of expression.
That has to be like the biggest revelation to me right now, because I never even considered that as an opportunity to move your body kind of deal. It opens that door, and I've never thought of it in that fashion, and that
Never thought of it as like a universal experience. Like I had that experience. Hearing it come from you made me realize that that's a pretty universal experience for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Things to consider at the top of our funnel.
Right?
It really just started breaking my brain, because I'm just like, this opened a whole new avenues of ideas and perspectives to look at now. I'm just like, holy
This is why we wanted you on. You are feeding us such valuable perspective on all of these things, and it's definitely just, I feel less hopeless now for the future. I feel a lot more empowered. I feel more empowered to know just how the potential for how we can be seen, for how we can be interpreted and welcomed into people's worlds. Like, this is such valuable perspective. So again, thank you for, being on and telling us these things. Like, this is incredibly valuable information for us.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate being here, and I appreciate you all inviting me into your space here, because this is one of those cases where I'm the outsider coming in rather than y'all maybe feeling like outsiders among poi spinners. So I really appreciate how open, welcoming, and warm you have been, and I can only pray the poi spinners that y'all come in contact with take that same spirit and apply it to you all.
Yeah, and the other thing I really hope that comes from this is that conversations between poi spinners and glovers actually open up a lot more, and just have these kind of conversations about the commonalities between the two arts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And show that it's okay to kind of cry out for help.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because that's what this is it's a giant cry for help.
I think that in a few years, y'all will look back on this and recognize that even though it was a moment when there was a lot of uncertainty and anxiety, that it was also a moment when there was a lot that was possible that wasn't before.
Yeah, I definitely agree to that.
Yeah, we're still here, aren't we?
Yeah, of course. The process of getting there might not be fun, but
No, it
Hey,
will
we've done
be a
it
slug.
before. We can do it again. We just have to
Yeah.
do it again.
yeah, I believe in you.
We've been going over just a little over 2 hours now. Is there any other kind of questions or topics you guys want to touch on? I'm kind of out of the tank here now.
I got everything.
Cool.
Well, I mean, Drex, do you have any questions for us, like as a poi spinner?
Yeah, I guess. Well, not as a poi spinner, but just as me. No, I'm kind of curious. Where do you want your art to be in 5 years? You personally and your community.
Oh, that's a big question.
I want to be in music videos. I want to be used as a dancer in any way, just the same way that you would in different music videos and outlets and forums. That's where I want to be personally.
Yeah.
And then I want to see gloving follow the trajectory of skateboarding. I've said it 100 times. I'll say it again. We right now is where skateboarding was in the 90s.
I will sound a word of warning on that because we had the exact same conversation in the poi world back in 2012.
Oh.
Sometimes it's helpful not to think of yourself as the next skateboarding or the next rollerblading. Sometimes it's helpful to think of yourself as the first this other thing.
I like that. That's a better perspective to take for sure.
Yeah, very.
Sorry,
very strong
I also
words to
feel like I
listen.
totally stepped on that point. So
No,
No,
you're good.
no.
No, it's why you're here. It's valuable.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, I definitely am like in the same camp as Sari here with music videos, and one of the things that I feel like would actually help with a lot of exposure and discovery is trying to get in touch with these DJs who do Twitch streams. A lot of musicians do a lot of these live streams and do that kind of content, and I feel like since we do have a symbiotic relationship with EDM as glovers, it's a kind of a natural progression for us, you know, to put ourselves out there. We know we have skills, we have talents, we all know that. It's now time to put those talents forward for people to see and be inspired, and then go down this rabbit hole, or as you like to put it, the funnel, to go down the funnel and become, you know, the next Gummy, the next Starlight, the next Puppet, the next whoever down the road, you know. But yeah, no, that's definitely a big huge inspiration right there, is to make it to that point of making music videos on a professional level. Like,
Oh yeah, I would love to see some gloving in music videos. Are there already examples of that?
Yes, a couple.
Yeah, Kevin's a really good one for sure. We could send something. I don't know if he's seen any of those, but we should
Who
definitely
got-
send some of them in his way.
Didn't somebody get into like a Flux Pavilion video or something like that?
I do remember Sharky having a
Sharky,
music video.
yeah.
I remember
A lot of
like,
amazing-
Cascade.
A lot of amazing projects were like that,
Yeah.
and they actually had like
It was Cascade, yes, Cascade.
Yeah.
That's who I was thinking of, yeah. So
Oh,
it
okay.
has happened, it just hasn't like proliferated the way that we would want it to.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I mean, I even mentioned it in my Amazing Lights video. The different artists that have taken gloving, like Steve Aoki has taken pictures and photographs with him wearing gloves. I can't remember her name to save my life, but she's one of the big full body dancers that.
Ditto.
Thank you. Yes, she really took off with it as well, and she went into the world of dance and is now doing her thing. And there was
I got
one
to
other
meet
name
her
I
actually.
can't remember.
She's really nice. Ditto's really nice. I got to meet her. She's very kind.
Aw.
Yeah,
good to
definitely
hear.
would love to have her on the show too.
Whoa, that I don't know if that message will carry me as far as it did with Drex. We'll see.
Oh, I know. It's just wishful thinking here.
I can try.
But
Yeah.
Well, I will keep my fingers crossed for you there.
thank you.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you guys want to say?
Hey, I still have yet to
Oh yeah, Josh.
Oh,
Where do you want your art to be in 5 years, both personally and community?
That's a very big question.
We
At least I'll-
haven't asked any of those in the time that I've been on here, not a one.
At the very least, on a personal level, like I would like a stronger local community, right? I would like to get just more types of people who are not traditionally within our world to engage with the art. I've always said that I think it would make for a much more interesting place. It might be a much more tumultuous place, but that's something that for myself I think is okay because it's not like conflict can't ever be resolved, right? Like the other thing for myself personally is that I have a lot of like aspirations to help the technology of gloving grow, because there are several things I think are severely lacking right now. I'm trying to get those ideas in with anyone really who's willing to explore it, because I'm not an engineer. I'm too smooth brained for that. But I think my ideas fundamentally could change a lot of the ways that we look at gloving technology right now. But yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think with what Josh said about like encouraging more local communities to grow, I think that's another point for me when it comes to like what I want to see in the art in 5 years, is that it's not such an arduous, painstakingly task to get like 10 people to get interested. I actually would like to see that we create avenues that if anybody wants to start a local scene, that we could actually help them show like how to do that doesn't feel like they have to spend an arm and a leg just so they can try to get it to happen. And I think that's what Amazing Lights kind of helped cultivate, is an avenue to make that really easy. So that's something I definitely want to see, is that local communities have a much easier time growing and thriving on its own kind of deal.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I'll bop that back to you. Where would you like to see gloving in 5 years?
Oh, she hit you with a hard question.
This is why we get along. I love it. Interesting. Thriving, number one. I would love to see y'all in a place where you feel like you have more control over your own destiny, and that the people who are at the wheel of the bus are people that you feel like represent the best of what your community has to offer, and that make for good role models for people who are coming into it for the first time. I also think it'd be cool to see gloving in music videos. I think that there's a lot of opportunities for discovery that we haven't gotten that deeply into, but like certainly the performance aspect of it, the storytelling aspect of it is something that is out there, and that's something that I've been trying to push in the poi world, and it can be a challenge, but I also think that it makes the art more accessible in general, because whenever people that are not immediately familiar with the thing see you spinning the thing, that becomes kind of a wall between you and them, because they have to wrap their minds around what's going on. Whereas if you're creating a performance that elicits an emotional response from them, it takes away the wall, because they can see a piece of their own experience reflected in it. So I think that is a very admirable goal and a very, very good direction to pursue. More concretely, I would love to see several glovers that are able to do it full time and able to make it sustainable for themselves, and more than that, are able to mentor other glovers on how they can earn a living doing it themselves. And because why not, let's shoot pie in the sky here. I want you all allowed into raves again.
Yeah.
Please. Please. Please.
Just allow us to express ourselves freely. I don't want another Dream State 2015.
I do not know what that means.
So to briefly summarize...
Oh, that was... Oof.
Yeah, so to briefly summarize, Dream State 2015 was an event that happened that security was extremely brutal towards the gloving community rather than any other flow arts, like orbiters
physically
and poi spinners.
brutal.
Yes.
Ooh.
Like there was physical altercations from security instigating it, kind of deal.
Tackling people, cutting wristbands, taking gloves, like really aggressive. It's one thing for it like, oh, you have to bring in your gloves and then be kind of sneaky. It's another thing where security is actively hunting you.
That's messed up.
Yeah, so that is one of our, I would say that's one of the darkest points of our history was Dream State 2015, because we saw that when given the opportunity, people are going to take it and abuse people with it. And that's what security did, was saw an opportunity to extort and abuse a very particular community. Not just flow arts in general. It was targeted towards glovers over anything else.
That's awful. I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. It was not cool. Not cool on a lot of levels. And I know like the response would be like, well, if they're banned, don't bring them into the show. Sure, but that doesn't give you the right to put your hands on somebody like that.
Right.
Yeah.
There is a distance between like, hey, you did something that wasn't allowed, and they have the right to physically assault you for having done that, which like,
Yeah, that's
in the grand scheme of I mean, that should be the absolute last case scenario for somebody who is like being physically disruptive and creating an active threat to other people. Gloving is nowhere near that. Like we're not in the same zip code, not in the same state.
right. And stop taking out your incompetence or the substance issue out on us.
Yeah.
You know, like there's such a focus, you know, on the substance control and use, and yet we get a lot of the brunt of it when it's like, will you turn around and look at the stage? Will you listen to the lyrics of the music that's happening here? Stop picking on us because this is out of control for you.
Yeah.
Like the vast majority of people that are doing those substances, they took them before they even knew I was there. They didn't see my lights and go, oh, hang on. Now I'm like, they don't do that. Like, it's
Right. I will definitely say the line in my video about like glovers getting targeted for associations with drug culture and being like, it's a rave.
yeah,
That
I
was-
really appreciated that.
I had to hear that because that line came this close to getting cut. I was just like, if there is something that people are going to come after me for in this video, it's going to be that line.
But no, you that's how we feel. Like it was wonderful to hear you say that, is to say like, you're so focused on us, yet it's a rave. Like,
Yeah.
You know, I
Cool.
think,
Stop
I'm
getting-
glad I left it in then.
yeah.
yeah, stop
Go ahead, Sari.
getting mad at people for having hay in their clothes while they're at a freaking horse race. Like, what do you want us to do? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you think that the drug association thing was the line that was going to get you in trouble, when I felt like the fire safety part where you talk about like the reasons why they banned it is because of fire safety, which anyone who has, you know, an ounce of thought can understand logistically from a business standpoint. Yeah, we need to take safety priority as well, and we have plenty of discussions and arguments about what did Brian call it, a flow garden? Was it like a designated
having
area
a flow
for us?
garden.
Yeah. But I also think he was thinking that in more of the greater sense of flow arts in general rather than just glovers, but he was kind of using glovers as the spearhead of it all.
For sure. Well, and for that particular line, I had a press release that I could go back to and say I was just quoting from this, whereas the line about it's a rave is 100% me editorializing. So there's nobody for me to throw the blame on for that one.
Nah,
Right.
at least for us, that made us feel seen. So we're
Aw.
happy you didn't cut that. I felt seen when you said that. I was like, yes, thank you. Like, and you are not you're not even a raver. You don't partake in really the rave culture and the rave society. So to have somebody that isn't even a raver come in and say, you guys are being ridiculous with this, was helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
Because sometimes we feel like we're the only ones saying it. Sometimes it feels like we're just like yelling into the void, and the void is just like, no, right back at us.
Well, I'm so glad that I kept that line in, and I'm so glad that it made you all feel seen. That means a lot knowing that.
Yeah. Is there anything else, or you guys feel like this is a good cutting off point?
I think I'm good.
Yeah, I like several questions ago. I had a bit of tea of like a conversation I had with Brian Lim when I went out to IGC, but I don't know that it's topical anymore. And
If you remember what it is, you can always just message one of us because we would love to know.
No, I know exactly what the story is, but it was a story specifically about the differences between gloving and poi, and about me kind of giving Brian Lim a cold shower about something he thought was going to work that was definitely not going to work. But I think that we already covered poi and gloving as flow arts and the overlaps and the knot, and I think that it's probably a much better idea to talk about the future of it rather than the past.
Yeah.
Totally fair.
Mm-hmm. If y'all ever want to have some tea, definitely hit me up. I've got my stories.
You and me both. Oh man.
Mm-hmm.
I know trying to make a video on Amazing Lights' history itself is going to be a very tumultuous task, because there is a lot to go through, and I think it actually has to be broken up into segments, because of all the points in history that it has. So
Absolutely. And I hope it is clear from having made that video that I don't consider that to be the definitive history of that or that moment. It is merely what I hope is part of a longer conversation, and I truly hope that people in the gloving community are also, taking that as an opportunity to tell their own history.
yes, definitely.
Cool. Outstanding.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, Josh, do you wanna give us our outro?
Oh, there is one more thing.
Oh.
Thank you all again so much for having me. This has been a blast. I've really appreciated talking with you all.
It's been a pleasure.
It has been the most humbling experience to have you on the show. So
It's been a privilege. Thank you.
yes, extreme privilege. You have no idea.
Oh, cool. I'm glad I could sit with you all. And again, I appreciate the warm welcome you've given me here.
Well, it seems like our time is up today, ladies and gentlemen. Do we have any pluggables today? Drex, you want to start off with any pluggables? Anything you want to plug for? Any social media? Anything that we should be looking forward to in terms of projects?
Sure. Check out my YouTube channel, of course, youtube.com/c/DrexFactor. I have been doing a series in which I've been learning the basics of traditional Maori short poi, which I'm really excited about because we do not give Maori people nearly enough credit for being the origin and root of poi spinning. So I'm really enjoying learning that, and actually bringing Maori people onto my channel to be able to share their art, which is long overdue. If people are interested in learning from me, I teach live stream classes, crowdcast.io/DrexFactorPoi, as well as my learning site at learn.drexfactor.com, depending upon whether you want an active or passive learning experience. Both things are options. And for those of you who live in the DMV and would like to hang out in my natural environment, Astrolab Brewing is just up the street from me. They make amazing beers. They are Kiwi owned, and actually the person who's teaching me poi is one of the bartenders there. And they have a new brew out for Black History Month that is directly supporting a foundation that helps people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds get into HBCUs. So go check out Astrolab this month and come say hi to me sometime.
Join you on that, because that's not too far from me. Sari, what about yourself?
Oh, I'm trying to get into more short form TikTok stuff, so you can find me. My TikTok username is Starlight the Sky. Trying to get into a little bit more of that. I will be restructuring a lot of my lesson plan formats for some You Got Moves stuff as we look to expand our classes a bit further. and just be on the lookout for more project videos from me, more higher quality stuff, and I hope to return to a lot more of my mental health talk stuff and come back to being the figure that I once was and kind of touch a bit more on the emotional side. I'm ready to touch some hearts again.
Oh, beautiful. Peter Prime, anything you would like to plug?
Well, I definitely would say I hope everybody tunes into next episode, because we do have another special guest coming on, and I'm very, very excited for this topic because, like Drex said, coaching and mentoring is a big thing that we need to work on in the community. And granted, our history has a history of gatekeeping and keeping secrets like the magicians used to do. So I think this is definitely going to be a great opportunity for people who have thought about doing coaching and didn't know where to start. This should be the episode for you to learn where you're going to start and some of the pitfalls you might want to avoid just from people's experiences.
Good.
For people learning about learning. All right, well, this has been another wonderful episode of Gloving Table Talks. Once again, I would like to thank our guest, Drex, and of course, Sari, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for
And to
having
all
me
you
too.
listeners out there, stay beautiful and good night.